Tonight you are exactly where you need to be. You've found your way to a quiet little corner of the night, where the world slows down, the stars begin to whisper, and soft stories drift like moonlight through the dark. I'm so glad you're here. Before we begin tonight's story, I just want to gently ask, if you find comfort in these bedtime moments, it would mean the world if you'd take a second to like this video, subscribe, or even share it with someone else who could use a little peace. Your support helps keep this cozy space glowing night after night. Now settle in, let the day melt away, and let's begin. Once upon a time, there lived a king who was always at war with his neighbors, which was very strange, as he was a good and kind man, quite content with his own country and not wanting to seize land belonging to other people. Perhaps he may have tried too much to please everybody, and that often ends in pleasing nobody. But, at any rate, he found himself at the end of a hard struggle, defeated in battle, and obliged to fall back behind the walls of his capital city. Once there, he began to make preparations for a long siege, and the first thing he did was to plan how best to send his wife to a place of security. The queen, who loved her husband dearly, would gladly have remained with him to share his dangers, but he would not allow it. So they parted with many tears, and the queen set out with a strong guard to a fortified castle on the outskirts of a great forest, some 200 miles distant. She cried nearly all the way, and when she arrived she cried still more, for everything in the castle was dusty and old, and outside there was only a gravelled courtyard, and the king had forbidden her to go beyond the walls without at least 2 soldiers to take care of her. Now the queen had only been married a few months, and in her own home she had been used to walk and ride all over the hills without any attendance at all. So she felt very dull at her being shut up in this way. However, she bore it for a long while because it was the king's wish. But when time passed and there were no signs of the war drifting in the direction of the castle, she grew bolder and sometimes strayed outside the walls in the direction of the forest. Then came a dreadful period when news from the king ceased entirely. He must surely be ill or dead, thought the poor girl, who even now was only 16. I can bear it no longer, and if I do not get a letter from him soon, I shall leave this horrible place and go back to see what is the matter. Oh, I do wish I had never come away. So, without telling anyone what she intended to do, she ordered a little low carriage to be built, something like a sledge. Only it was on 2 wheels, just big enough to hold 1 person. I am tired of being always in the castle, she said to her attendants, and I mean to hunt a little. Quite close by, of course, she added, seeing the anxious look on their faces. And there is no reason that you should not hunt too. All the faces brightened at that, for to tell the truth they were nearly as dull as their mistress, So the queen had her way, and 2 beautiful horses were brought from the stable to draw the little chariot. At first the queen took care to keep near the rest of the hunt, but gradually she stayed away longer and longer, and at last, one morning, she took advantage of the appearance of a wild boar, after which her whole court instantly galloped, to turn into a path in the opposite direction. Unluckily, it did not happen to lead towards the king's palace, where she intended to go, but she was so afraid her flight would be noticed that she whipped up her horses till they ran away. When she understood what was happening, the poor young queen was terribly frightened, and, dropping the reins, clung to the side of the chariot. The horses, thus left without any control, dashed blindly against a tree, and the queen was flung out on the ground, where she lay for some minutes unconscious. A rustling sound near her at length caused her to open her eyes. Before her stood a huge woman, almost a giantess, without any clothes save a lion's skin, which was thrown over her shoulders, while a dried snake's skin was plaited into her hair. In one hand she held a club on which she leaned, and in the other a quiver full of arrows. At the sight of this strange figure, the queen thought she must be dead, and gazing on an inhabitant of another world. So she murmured softly to herself, "I am not surprised that people are so loath to die when they know that they will see such horrible creatures." But lo, as she spoke, the giantess caught the words and began to laugh. "Oh, don't be afraid. You are still alive, and perhaps, after all, you may be sorry for it. I am the Lion Fairy, and you are going to spend the rest of your days with me in my palace, which is quite near this. So come along." But the queen shrank back in horror. "Oh, Madam Lion, take me back, I pray you, to my castle, and fix what ransom you like, for my husband will pay it, whatever it is." But the giantess shook her head. "I am rich enough already," she answered, "but I am often dull, and I think you may amuse me a little." And, so saying, she changed her shape into that of a lion, and throwing the queen across her back, she went down the 10,000 steps that led to her palace. The lion had reached the center of the earth before she stopped in front of a house, lighted with lamps, and built on the edge of a lake of quicksilver. In this lake, various huge monsters might be seen playing or fighting, the queen did not know which, and around flew rooks and ravens, uttering dismal croaks. In the distance was a mountain down whose sides waters slowly coursed. These were the tears of unhappy lovers. And nearer the gate were trees without either fruit of flowers, while nettles and brambles covered the ground. If the castle had been gloomy, what did the queen feel about this? For some days the queen was so much shaken by all she had gone through that she lay with her eyes closed, unable either to move or speak. When she got better, the Lion Fairy told her that if she liked, she could build herself a cabin, as she would have to spend her life in that place. At these words the queen burst into tears and implored her jailer to put her to death rather than condemn her to such a life. But the Lion Fairy only laughed and counseled her to try to make herself pleasant, as many worse things might befall her. "Is there no way in which I can touch your heart?" asked the poor girl in despair. Well, if you really wish to please me, you will make me a pasty out of the stings of bees, and be sure it is good." "But I don't see any bees," answered the queen, looking round. "Oh no, there aren't any," replied her tormentor, "but you will have to find them all the same." And so saying, she went away. "After all, what does it matter?" thought the queen to herself. "I have only one life, and I can but lose it." And not caring what she did, she left the palace, and seating herself under a yew tree, poured out all her grief. "Oh, my dear husband," wept she, "what will you think when you come to the castle to fetch me and find me gone? Rather 1,000 times that you should fancy me dead than imagine that I had forgotten you. Ah, how fortunate that the broken chariot should be lying in the wood, for then you may grieve for me as one devoured by wild beasts. And if another should take my place in your heart, well, at least I shall never know it." She might have continued for long in this fashion had not the voice of a crow directly overhead attracted her attention. Looking up to see what was the matter, she beheld, in the dim light, a crow holding a fat frog in his claws, which he evidently intended for his supper. The queen rose hastily from the seat, and striking the bird sharply on the claws with the fan which hung from her side, she forced him to drop the frog, which fell to the ground more dead than alive. The crow, furious at his disappointment, flew angrily away. As soon as the frog had recovered her senses, she hopped up to the queen, who was still sitting under the yew. Standing on her hind legs and bowing low before her, she said gently, "Beautiful lady, by what mischance do you come here? You are the only creature that I have seen do a kind deed since a fatal curiosity lured me to this place." "What sort of a frog can you be that knows the language of mortals?" asked the queen in her turn. "But if you do, tell me, I pray, if I alone am a captive, for hitherto I have beheld no one but the monsters of the lake." "Once upon a time they were men and women like yourself," answered the frog. "But having power in their hands, they used it for their own pleasure. Therefore, fate has sent them here for a while to bear the punishment of their misdoings." "But you, friend frog, you are not one of these wicked people, I am sure?" asked the queen. "I am half a fairy," replied the frog, "but although I have certain magic gifts, I am not able to do all I wish. And if the lion fairy were to know of my presence in her kingdom, she would hasten to kill me." "But if you are a fairy, how was it that you were so nearly slain by the crow?" said the queen, wrinkling her forehead. "Because the secret of my power lies in my little cap that is made of rose leaves. But I had laid it aside for the moment when that horrible crow pounced upon me. Once it is on my head, I fear nothing. But let me repeat, had it not been for you, I could not have escaped death. And if I can do anything to help you or soften your hard fate, you have only to tell me." "Alas," sighed the queen, "I have been commanded by the lion fairy to make her a pasty out of the stings of bees, and as far as I can discover, there are none here. As how should there be, seeing there are no flowers for them to feed on? And even if there were, how could I catch them?" "Leave it to me," said the frog. "I will manage it for you." And, Uttering a strange noise, she struck the ground thrice with her foot. In an instant 6,000 frogs appeared before her, one of them bearing a little cap. "Cover yourselves with honey, and hop round by the beehives," commanded the frog, putting on the cap which her friend was holding in her mouth. And turning to the queen, he added, "The lion fairy keeps a store of bees in a secret place near to the bottom of the 10,000 steps leading into the upper world. Not that she wants them for herself, but they are sometimes useful to her in punishing her victims. However, this time we will get the better of her." Just as she had finished speaking, the 6,000 frogs returned, looking so strange with bees sticking to every part of them that, sad as she felt, the poor queen could not help laughing. The bees were all so stupefied with what they had eaten that it was possible to draw their stings without hunting them. So, with the help of her friend, the queen soon made ready her pasty and carried it to the lion fairy. "Not enough pepper," said the giantess, gulping down large morsels, in order to hide the surprise she felt. "Well, you have escaped this time, and I am glad to find I have got a companion a little more intelligent than the others I have tried. Now, you had better go and build yourself a house." So the queen wandered away, and picking up a small axe which lay near the door, she began with the help of her friend the frog to cut down some cypress trees for the purpose. And not content with that, the 6,000 froggy servants were told to help also, and it was not long before they had built the prettiest little cabin in the world, and made a bed in one corner of dried ferns which they fetched from the top of the 10,000 steps. It looked soft and comfortable, and the queen was very glad to lie down upon it, so tired was she with all that had happened since the morning. Scarcely, however, had she fallen asleep when the lake monsters began to make the most horrible noises just outside, while a small dragon crept in and terrified her so that she ran away, which was just what the dragon wanted. The poor queen crouched under a rock for the rest of the night, and the next morning when she woke from her troubled dreams, she was cheered at seeing the frog watching by her. "I hear we shall have to build you another palace," said she. "Well, this time we won't go so near the lake." And she smiled with her funny wide mouth till the queen took heart, and they went together to find wood for the new cabin. The tiny palace was soon ready, and a fresh bed made of wild thyme which smelt delicious. Neither the queen nor the frog said anything about it, but somehow, as always happens, the story came to the ears of the lion fairy, and she sent a raven to fetch the culprit. "What gods or men are protecting you?" she asked with a frown. "This earth, dried up by a constant rain of sulfur and fire, produces nothing. Yet I hear that your bed is made of sweet-smelling herbs. However, as you can get flowers for yourself, of course you can get them for me. And in an hour's time I must have in my room a nosegay of the rarest flowers. If not, now you can go." The poor queen returned to her house looking so sad that the frog, who was waiting for her, noticed it directly. "What is the matter?" said she, smiling. "Oh, how can you laugh?" replied the queen. This time I have to bring her in an hour a posy of the rarest flowers, and where am I to find them? If I fail, I know she will kill me." "Well, I must see if I can't help you," answered the frog. "The only person I have made friends with here is a bat. She is a good creature and always does what I tell her, so I will just lend her my cap, and if she puts it on and flies into the world, she will bring back all we want. I would go myself, only she will be quicker." Then the queen dried her eyes and waited patiently, and long before the hour had gone by, the bat flew in with all the most beautiful and sweetest flowers that grew on the earth. The girl sprang up overjoyed at the sight, and hurried with them to the lion fairy, who was so astonished that for once she had nothing to say. Now the smell and touch of the flowers had made the queen sick with longing for her home, and she told the frog that she would certainly die if she did not manage to escape somehow. "Let me consult my cap," said the frog, and taking it off she laid it in a box, and threw in after it a few sprigs of juniper, some capers, and 2 peas, which she carried under her right leg. She then shut down the lid of the box and murmured some words which the queen did not catch. In a few moments a voice was heard speaking from the box. "Fate, who rules us all," said the voice, "forbids your leaving this place till the time shall come when certain things are fulfilled. But instead, a gift shall be given you, which will comfort you in all your troubles." And the voice spoke truly, for a few days after, when the frog peeped in at the door, she found the most beautiful baby in the world lying by the side of the queen. "So the cap has kept its word," cried the frog with delight. "How soft its cheeks are, and what tiny feet it has got! What shall we call it?" This was a very important point, and needed much discussion. 1,000 names were proposed and rejected for 1,000 silly reasons. One was another reminded the queen of somebody she did not like, but at length an idea flashed into the queen's head, and she called out, "I know, we will call her Muffet." "That is the very thing!" shouted the frog, jumping high into the air, and so it was settled. The Princess Muffet was about 6 months old when the frog noticed that the queen had begun to grow sad again. "Why do you have that look in your eyes?" she asked one day when she had come in to play with the baby, who could now crawl. The way they played their game was to let Muffet creep close to the frog, and then for the frog to bound high into the air and alight on the child's head, or back, or legs, when she always sent up a shout of pleasure. There is no playfellow like a frog, but then it must be a fairy frog, or else you might hurt it, and if you did something dreadful might happen to you. Well, as I have said, our frog was struck with the queen's sad face, and lost no time in asking her what was the reason. "I don't see what you have to complain of now. Muffet is quite well and quite happy, and even the lion fairy is kind to her when she sees her. What is it?" "Oh, if her father could only see her!" broke forth the queen, clasping her hands. "Or if I could only tell him all that has happened since we parted. But they will have brought him tidings of the broken carriage, and he will have thought me dead, or devoured by wild beasts. And though he will mourn for me long, I know that well. Yet in time they will persuade him to take a wife, and she will be young and fair, and he will forget me. And in all this the queen guessed truly, save that 9 long years were to pass before he would consent to put another in her place. The frog answered nothing at the time, but stopped her game and hopped away among the cypress trees. Here she sat and thought, and the next morning she went back to the queen and said, "I have come, madam, to make you an offer. Shall I go to the king instead of you, and tell him of your sufferings, and that he has the most charming baby in the world for his daughter? The way is long, and I travel slowly, but sooner or later I shall be sure to arrive. Only, are you not afraid to be left without my protection? Ponder the matter carefully. It is for you to decide." "Oh, it needs no pondering," cried the queen joyfully, holding up her clasped hands, and making Muffet do likewise, in token of gratitude. "But in order that he may know that you have come from me, I will send him a letter." And pricking her arm, she wrote a few words with her blood on the corner of her handkerchief. Then, tearing it off, she gave it to the frog, and they bade each other farewell. It took the frog a year and 4 days to mount the 10,000 steps that led to the upper world, but that was because she was still under the spell of a wicked fairy. By the time she reached the top, she was so tired that she had to remain for another year on the banks of a stream to rest, and also to arrange the procession with which she was to present herself before the king. For she knew far too well what was due to herself and her relations, to appear at court as if she was a mere nobody. At length, after many consultations with her cap, the affair was settled, and at the end of the 2nd year after her parting with the queen they all set out. First walked her bodyguard of grasshoppers, followed by her maids of honor, who were those tiny green frogs you see in the fields, each one mounted on a snail, and seated on a velvet saddle. Next came the water rats, dressed as pages, and lastly the frog herself, in a litter borne by 8 toads and made of tortoise shell. Here she could lie at her ease, with her cap on her head, for it was quite large and roomy, and could easily have held 2 eggs when the frog was not in it. The journey lasted 7 years, and all this time the queen suffered tortures of hope, though Muffet did her best to comfort her. Indeed, she would most likely have died had not the lion fairy taken a fancy that the child and her mother should go hunting with her in the upper world. And in spite of her sorrows, it was always a joy to the queen to see the sun again. As for little Muffet, by the time she was 7, her arrows seldom missed their mark. So, after all, the years of waiting passed more quickly than the queen had dared to hope. The frog was always careful to maintain her dignity, and nothing would have persuaded her to show her face in public places, or even along the high road where there was a chance of meeting anyone. But sometimes, when the procession had to cross a little stream or go over a piece of marshy ground, orders would be given for a halt. Fine clothes were thrown off, bridles were flung aside, and grasshoppers, water rats, even the frog herself, spent a delightful hour or 2 playing in the mud. But at length the end was in sight, and the hardships were forgotten in the vision of the towers of the king's palace. and one bright morning the cavalcade entered the gates with all the pomp and circumstance of a royal embassy. And surely no ambassador had ever created such a sensation. Door and windows, even the roofs of houses, were filled with people, whose cheers reached the ears of the king. However, he had no time to attend to such matters just then, as, after 9 years, he had at last consented to the entreaties of his courtiers, and was on the eve of celebrating his second marriage. The frog's heart beat high when her litter drew up before the steps of the palace, and leaning forward she beckoned to her side one of the guards who were standing in his doorway. "I wish to see his Majesty," said he. "His Majesty is engaged, and can see no one," answered the soldier. "His Majesty will see me," returned the frog, fixing her eye upon him. And somehow the man found himself leading the procession along the gallery into the hall of audience, where the king sat surrounded by his nobles arranging the dresses which everyone was to wear at his marriage ceremony. All stared in surprise as the procession advanced, and still more when the frog gave one bound from the litter onto the floor, and with another landed on the arm of the chair of state. "I am only just in time, sire," began the frog. "Had I been a day later, you would have broken your faith, which you swore to the Queen 9 years ago." "Her remembrance will always be dear to me," answered the king gently, though all present expected him to rebuke the frog severely for her impertinence. But know, Lady Frog, that a king can seldom do as he wishes, but must be bound by the desires of his subjects. For 9 years I have resisted them. Now I can do so no longer, and have made choice of the fair young maiden playing at ball yonder. You cannot wed her, however fair she may be, for the queen your wife is still alive, and sends you this letter written in her own blood," said the frog, holding out the square of handkerchief as she spoke. "And what is more, you have a daughter who is nearly 9 years old, and more beautiful than all the other children in the world put together." The king turned pale when he heard these words, and his hand trembled so that he could hardly read what the queen had written. Then he kissed the handkerchief twice or thrice and burst into tears, and it was some minutes before he could speak. When at length he found his voice, he told his counselors that the writing was indeed that of the queen, and now that he had the joy of knowing she was alive, he could, of course, proceed no further with his second marriage. This naturally displeased the ambassadors who had conducted the bride to court, and one of them inquired indignantly if he meant to put such an insult on the princess on the word of a mere frog. "I am not a mere frog, and I will give you proof of it," retorted the angry little creature, and putting on her cap she cried, "Fairies that are my friends, come hither." And in a moment a crowd of beautiful creatures, each one with a crown on her head, stood before her. Certainly none could have guessed that they were the snails, water rats, and grasshoppers from which she had chosen her retinue. At a sign from the frog, the fairies danced a ballet, with which everyone was so delighted that they begged to have to repeat it. But now it was not youths and maidens who were dancing, but flowers. Then these again melted into fountains, whose waters interlaced and, rushing down the sides of the hall, poured out in a cascade down the steps, and formed a river found the castle, with the most beautiful little boats upon it, all painted and gilded. "Oh, let us go in them for a sail!" cried the princess, who had long ago left her game of ball for a sight of these marvels. And as she was bent upon it, the ambassadors, who had been charged never to lose sight of her, were obliged to go also, though they never entered a boat if they could help it. But the moment they and the princess had seated themselves on the soft cushions, river and boats vanished, and the princess and the ambassadors vanished too. Instead, the snails and grasshoppers and water rats stood round the frog in their natural shapes. "Perhaps," said she, "your Majesty may now be convinced that I am a fairy and speak the truth. Therefore lose no time in setting in order the affairs of your kingdom and go in search of your wife. Here is a ring that will admit you into the presence of the Queen, and will likewise allow you to address unharmed the Lion Fairy, though she is the most terrible creature that ever existed." By this time the king had forgotten all about the princess, whom he had only chosen to please his people, and was as eager to depart on his journey as the frog was for him to go. He made one of his ministers regent of the kingdom, and gave the frog everything her heart could desire. And with her ring on his finger, he rode away to the outskirts of the forest. Here he dismounted, and bidding his horse go home, he pushed forward on foot. Having nothing to guide him as to where he was likely to find the entrance of the underworld, the king wandered hither and thither for a long while, till one day, while he was resting under a tree, a voice spoke to him. "Why do you give yourself so much trouble for naught, when you might know what you want to know for the asking? Alone you will never discover the path that leads to your wife." Much startled, the king looked about him. He could see nothing, and somehow, when he thought about it, the voice seemed as if it were part of himself. Suddenly his eyes fell on the ring, and he understood. "Fool that I was!" cried he. "And how much precious time have I wasted! Dear ring, I beseech you, grant me a vision of my wife and my daughter." And even as he spoke, there flashed past him a huge lioness, followed by a lady and a beautiful young maid mounted on fairy horses. Almost fainting with joy, he gazed after them, and then sank back trembling on the ground. "Oh, lead me to them, lead me to them!" he exclaimed. And the ring, bidding him take courage, conducted him safely to the dismal place where his wife had lived for 10 years. Now the Lion Fairy knew beforehand of his expected presence in her dominions, and she ordered a palace of crystal to be built in the middle of the lake of quicksilver, and in order to make it more difficult of approach, she let it float whither it would. Immediately after their return from the chase, where the king had seen them, she conveyed the queen and Muffet into the palace, and put them under the guard of the monsters of the lake, who one and all had fallen in love with the princess. They were horribly jealous, and ready to eat each other up for her sake. So they readily accepted the charge. Some stationed themselves round the floating palace, some sat by the door, while the smallest and lightest perched themselves on the roof. Of course the king was quite ignorant of these arrangements, and boldly entered the palace of the Lion Fairy, who was waiting for him, with her tail lashing furiously, for she still kept her lion's shape. With a roar that shook the walls, she flung herself upon him, but he was on the watch, and a blow from his sword cut off the paw she had put forth to strike him dead. She fell back, and with his helmet still on and his shield up, he set his foot on her throat. "Give me back the wife and the child you have stolen from me," he said, "or you shall not live another second." But the fairy answered, "Look through the window at that lake and see if it is in my power to give them to you." And the king looked, and through the crystal walls he beheld his wife and daughter floating on the quicksilver. At that sight the lion fairy and all her wickedness was forgotten. Flinging off his helmet, he shouted to them with all his might. The queen knew his voice, and she and Muffet ran to the window and held out their hands. Then the king swore a solemn oath that he would never leave the spot without taking them if it should cost him his life. And he meant it, though at the moment he did not know what he was undertaking. 3 years passed by, and the king was no nearer to obtaining his heart's desire. He had suffered every hardship that could be imagined. Nettles had been his bed, wild fruits more bitter than gall his food, while his days had been spent in fighting the hideous monsters which kept him from the palace. He had not advanced one single step, nor gained one solitary advantage. Now he was almost in despair, and ready to defy everything and throw himself into the lake. It was at this moment of his blackest misery that, one night, a dragon who had long watched him from the roof crept to his side. "You thought that love would conquer all obstacles," said he. "Well, you have found it hasn't. But if you will swear to me by your crown and scepter that you will give me a dinner of the food that I never grow tired of, whenever I choose to ask for it, I will enable you to reach your wife and daughter." Ah, how glad the king was to hear that! What oath would he not have taken so as to clasp his wife and child in his arms? Joyfully he swore whatever the dragon asked of him. Then he jumped on his back, and in another instant would have been carried by the strong wings into the castle, if the nearest monsters had not happened to awake and hear the noise of talking and swum to the shore to give battle. The fight was long and hard, and when the king at last beat back his foes, another struggle awaited him. At the entrance, gigantic bats, owls, and crows set upon him from all sides, but the dragon had teeth and claws, while the queen broke off sharp bits of glass and stabbed and cut in her anxiety to help her husband. At length the horrible creatures flew away. A sound like thunder was heard. The palace and the monsters vanished, while at the same moment, no one knew how, the king found himself standing with his wife and daughter in the hall of his own home. The dragon had disappeared with all the rest, and for some years no more was heard or thought of him. Muffet grew every day more beautiful, and when she was 14, the kings and emperors of the neighboring countries sent to ask her in marriage for themselves or their sons. For a long time the girl turned a deaf ear to all their prayers, but at length a young prince of rare gifts touched her heart, and though the king had left her free to choose what husband she would, He had secretly hoped that out of all the wooers this one might be his son-in-law. So they were betrothed that some day with great pomp, and then with many tears, the prince set out for his father's court, bearing with him a portrait of Muffet. The days passed slowly to Muffet, in spite of her brave efforts to occupy herself and not to sadden other people by her complaints. One morning she was playing on her harp in the queen's chamber when the king burst into the room and clasped his daughter in his arms with an energy that almost frightened her. "Oh, my dear child, why were you ever born?" cried he as soon as he could speak. "Is the prince dead?" faltered Muffet, growing white and cold. "No, no, but, oh, how can I tell you?" And he sank down on a pile of cushions, while his wife and daughter knelt beside him. At length he was able to tell his tale, and a terrible one it was. There had just arrived at court a huge giant, as ambassador from the dragon by whose help the king had rescued the queen and Muffet from the crystal palace. The dragon had been very busy for many years past, and had quite forgotten the princess till the news of her betrothal reached his ears. Then he remembered the bargain he had made with her father, and the more he heard of Muffet, the more he felt sure she would make a delicious dish. So he had ordered the giant who was his servant to fetch her at once. No words would paint the horror of both the queen and the princess as they listened to this dreadful doom. They rushed instantly to the hall, where the giant was awaiting them, and flinging themselves at his feet implored him to take the kingdom if he would, but to have pity on the princess. The giant looked at them kindly, for he was not at all hard-hearted, but said that he had no power to do anything, and that if the princess did not go with him quietly, the dragon would come himself. Several days went by, and the king and queen hardly ceased from entreating the aid of the giant, who by this time was getting weary of waiting. "There is only one way of helping you," he said at last, "and that is to marry the princess to my nephew, who, besides being young and handsome, has been trained in magic and will know how to keep her safe from the dragon." "Oh, thank you," cried the parents, clasping his great hands to their breasts. "You have indeed lifted a load from us. She shall have half the kingdom for her dowry." But Muffet stood up and thrust them aside. "I will not buy my life with faithlessness," she said proudly, "and I will go with you this moment to the dragon's abode." And all her father's and mother's tears and prayers availed nothing to move her. The next morning Muffet was put into a litter, and guarded by the giant and followed by the king and queen and the weeping maids of honor, they started for the foot of the mountain where the dragon had his castle. The way, though rough and stony, seemed all too short, and when they reached the spot appointed by the dragon, the giant ordered the men who bore the litter to stand still. "It is time for you to bid farewell to your daughter," said he, "for I see the dragon coming to us." It was true. A cloud appeared to pass over the sun, for between them and it they could all discern dimly a huge body 1/2 mile long approaching nearer and nearer. At first the king could not believe that this was the small beast who had seemed so friendly on the shore of the lake of quicksilver, but then he knew very little of necromancy, and had never studied the art of expanding and contracting his body. But it was the dragon, and nothing else. whose 6 wings were carrying him forward as fast as might be, considering his great weight and the length of his tail, which had 50 twists and a half. He came quickly, yes, but the frog, mounted on a greyhound and wearing her cap on her head, went quicker still. Entering a room where the prince was sitting gazing at the portrait of his betrothed, she cried to him, "What are you doing lingering here, when the life of the princess is nearing its last moment? In the courtyard you will find a green horse with 3 heads and 12 feet, and by its side a sword 18 yards long. Hasten, lest you should be too late." The fight lasted all day, and the prince's strength was well nigh spent, when the dragon, thinking that the victory was won, opened his jaws to give a roar of triumph. The prince saw his chance, and before his foe could shut his mouth again, had plunged his sword far down his adversary's throat. There was a desperate clutching of the claws to the earth, a slow flagging of the great wings, then the monster rolled over on his side and moved no more. Mafet was delivered. After this they all went back to the palace. The marriage took place the following day, and Mafet and her husband lived happy forever after. John Cooper was a little boy whose father and mother lived in a cottage on one side of a village green. He was his parents' only child, so that he had no brothers nor sisters to play with. But he had a dog of which he was very fond, and he used sometimes to play with other children on the green. Tom Jones was one of the boys that played with John Cooper. One day he asked John Cooper to go for a long walk with him instead of going to school. John at first would not consent, but at last he gave way and went with Tom, taking Carlo with him. There was a pretty stream of water that ran along one side of the green, and then passed through a wood in a winding course. In some places it was rather broad and deep, and in other places it was shallow, and ran murmuring over the stones at the bottom. Tom said that it would be very pleasant to go along the stream, sometimes on one side, and sometimes on the other, far into the wood, and to look for birds' nests. The sun was shining very brightly, the trees were in full leaf, the grass was thick and green, sweet flowers were blooming on all sides. Butterflies and dragonflies sported in the sunshine, and birds were singing on every bush and tree. All things seemed to be joyful, and the 2 boys started off briskly, with Carlo after them. But of this party, the only one that was truly happy was Carlo. He had nothing to do but to obey his master, and this he had done when John had called him away from his home. John tried to raise his own spirits, and ran and jumped about and romped with Carlo. But he could not forget that he had done wrong, that he ought to have been at school, and that he should grieve his kind parents when they knew what he was now doing. The thought of this would come into his mind, and kept him from being happy. As for Tom Jones, he seemed merry enough, though he not only knew that he was doing wrong himself, but that he had led John into mischief. He tried to forget this, and laughed and shouted with all his might. But it was in vain. and he had bitter feelings at the bottom of his heart all the time. They went on rambling till they had got more than a mile into the wood. The stream here was wide and deep. On one side of it there grew an old willow, and in one of the branches of this they saw a wren's nest. As Tom was the stronger boy of the two, it was agreed that he should help John up to the branch, so that he might reach the nest. John got upon the branch, and he had put out his hand to take hold of the nest, when the branch broke off, and down he fell into the water. Tom laughed at this, for he knew that the stream was not deep enough to drown him, but Carlo rushed in and dragged his master by the clothes towards the bank. John scrambled out, but he was covered with mud. Tom helped him to take off his clothes and clean off the mud and dry them, but with all they could do, John was still in a sad mess. And as it was now late in the day, he turned to go home with a heavy heart. When he reached the cottage, he found his father and mother in great alarm, as they could not think what had become of him. When they found out what had taken place, their alarm was changed into grief, on account of the son whom they loved so much, having done wrong. John himself cried a great deal, and said that he was more vexed because he had caused them grief than he should have been if they had scolded and whipped him. His mother told him that she left it to his own heart to scold him, and that he should go to his bedroom and pray to God on his knees to forgive him, as she had taught him to pray. John did as she bade him, and he prayed to God with all his heart. He then went to sleep with a quiet mind, and when he awoke the next morning, he prayed again that God would give him strength to do his duty, and to stand firm when he should be tempted again, as he had been by Tom Jones. He then read a chapter in the Bible to his mother, and went to school. His master kept him in, and gave him only a piece of bread and a cup of water for dinner. But he did not suffer nearly so much from this as he had done from having grieved his dear parents, for he had before this been brought to repent, and he felt that God and his father and mother had forgiven him. John Cooper never again grieved his father and mother by doing wrong, and never forgot the lesson he had learned when Tom Jones led him astray, as long as he lived. When John Cooper became a man, there were bad times, and he could not get a living at the trade to which he had been brought up. So he went for a horse soldier, and before he went, his father and mother gave him their blessing, and he prayed with all his heart that God would bless the old people and preserve them, and said he would let them have as much of his pay as ever he could. It was a sad day for him and his parents when he went away. They had never been parted for so long a time before, and he was now going to India, from whence he could not return for some years, but they could not help it. So they all said that it was God's will that they should part, and it was their duty to bear it as well as they could. After John was gone, the old people never missed a day, but they prayed to God to keep their son, both in his soul and body, from all evil. They were very poor, and were now too old to work much. But with what they got of John's pay, they had enough just to live upon, and above all they had thankful hearts, which made them happy. Yet they often wished for John's return. Sometimes, too, they were fearful lest he should be killed or wounded in the wars. But when they felt thus, they always tried to put their trust in God. When John had been away 10 years, he came back one day, safe and sound, as his father and mother were standing at the door of the cottage. You may judge how they all felt, and how many questions his fond mother asked him as to where he had been and how he had got on. The next day was Sunday, and both John and his parents were glad of it, for they wished to go to church to offer up their thanks to God, who had kept John safe through many dangers, had saved the lives of the old people, and had now brought them to each other again. It was a fine bright morning in spring, just such a one as it had been nearly 20 years before, when Tom Jones had tempted John Cooper to keep away from school and to go into the wood to take birds' nests. John did not forget that day, and when it came into his mind he could not help thinking of the changes that had taken place since. He went to church, and you may be sure that he and the old man and woman gave thanks to God with all their hearts for the mercy he had shown to them. Mary Jones was a poor woman whose husband had gone to sea on a long voyage. She lived in a house by the roadside and got her living by washing. She had 2 little boys who were her great comfort and whom she used to call Ned and Tom. For some time after her husband had left, she got on very well and was able to send the boys to school, but she caught a fever and was forced to keep her bed. Her neighbor, Sarah Smith, was very kind to her and used to come to the house every morning and evening to do what she could to help her. But she was a poor woman and could not afford to give Mary Jones anything that cost money. So poor Mary was forced to part with a great many things that she might get food. Ned and Tom at this time took turns to go to school. Tom used to go to school one day, while Ned waited on his mother. And the next day Ned went to school and Tom stayed at home. One morning when Ned was going to school, the thought of his poor mother pressed hard on his heart, and after he had gone a little way, he burst out crying. He had not gone far along the narrow lane towards the school when 2 young ladies met him and asked him why he was crying. He told them that he was thinking of his poor sick mother. The ladies then asked him his name and where he lived, and said they would go and call upon his mother. He thanked them and dried up his tears, and went on to school with a much lighter heart. Soon after he reached home in the evening, the 2 kind ladies came to his mother's house with a footboy, who brought a basket filled with bread and meat, and some things fit for the poor sick woman. They told Mary Jones how they had met Ned in the lane, and what he had told them, and she thanked them for what they had brought, and said that she hoped God would bless them for their goodness to her. They then asked about Ned and Tom, and said they would get their father to do what he could for them. The young ladies then went home, told their father and mother what they had seen and heard, and thanked God that they had been able to make a poor woman and her 2 sons happy. There was a poor woman named Rachel Jenkins, who lived in a very little cottage at some distance from any other house. She was a widow and very poor, but she was very clean and careful, so that her cottage had always a look of neatness and comfort. She used to spend most of her time in spinning. She had 1 son, whose name was Harry. He was 12 years old, and used to carry a basket filled with tapes and thread, pins and needles, and other things of that sort, which he sold to people who lived near. He used to go out in the morning and return in the evening, and you may be sure his mother was always glad when the time came for him to come home. One evening, as he was on his way home, about half a mile from his mother's house, he saw an old man sitting by the wayside, who was very tired and seemed as if he was not able to walk any further. His hair was quite white, and his face and hands were thin and wrinkled. Harry said to him in a kind voice, "You seem tired, Father. Have you got much further to walk?" The old man told him that he had to go to the next town, which was 12 miles further, but that he was so tired he was sure that he should not be able to get there that night. On this, Harry said, "I wish you would go home with me, for I am sure my mother would be very glad that you should sleep in our house." The old man thanked him and said he would go with him. So he rested his hand upon Harry's shoulder and walked slowly towards the house. Harry's mother met them at the door, and when Harry had told her how he had met with the old man, she said she was glad to see him and asked him to walk in to take some tea. After tea, the old man told Sarah Jenkins that he was going to see his son, who was laid up in a hospital in the town to which he was going. His son was a soldier, and had been in the West Indies for some years, but he caught the yellow fever and was sent home sick. The next morning the old man went on his way and blessed Sarah Jenkins and Harry, because they had done good to him who could make no other return than to thank them and pray for them. When I was a girl, Sunday evening used to be the part of the week that I loved best, and I liked it better in winter than in summer. We used to sit round a blazing fire. My mother used then to teach my little brother Tom to say his prayers, and my father used to teach me to read in Pilgrim's Progress or some such book, while my brother John sat near reading some book or other that was fit for a Sunday with his dog Hector lying at his feet. My dear old grandfather was then alive, and he would sit at the table with the large old family Bible before him for the whole evening. As I look back upon the pleasant picture in my mind, my eye fills with tears. I cannot help thinking of what has become of the faces that were then so full of smiles and gladness. My grandfather went to the grave first, but he died in a good old age. And though we mourned to lose him whom we had all loved so much, We could not help feeling that it was a happy change for him, as he could hardly see or hear. Next to him, my poor little brother Tom fell ill of the typhus fever, and God took him to heaven in the budding of his childhood. Only a year or two ago, my father gave me his dying blessing and was then a very old man. My mother now survives, though very old, and my two sisters, Mary and Elizabeth, who were then lively girls, are living and are the mothers of families. My brother John, a middle-aged man, is the captain of a ship, being now far away on a voyage, and he has left behind him a wife and two boys, the youngest of whom is as old as he was at the time I have spoken of. I am almost an old woman, though on these happy evenings that I was speaking of, I was the youngest but one. You, my little friends, will perhaps some day have to look back upon such changes as I have seen. The thought that they will come upon you need not make you sad, but it should make you good, and cause you to resolve to do your duty and to serve God. If you do so, when you get as old as I am, you will find that if age brings its cares and sorrows, it also brings surer and even brighter hopes of a life beyond the grave. John Davis and his wife were very poor people, but as they worked very hard, they could just get a living for themselves. John worked for a farmer in the parish, and his wife took in needlework. They did pretty well when John had work, but for nearly 2 years John's master could not employ him always, and he was brought almost to distress. But his wife always used to keep up his spirits by saying, "Be content, and thank God if you can but live. Brighter hours will come." Sometimes John was quite spirit-broken, and said he should leave home and try to get work somewhere else. He was forced to sell some of his goods to buy food and did not know which way to turn. But his wife never failed to wear a cheerful face, and used to be always saying to him, "Do your best, and be content to take what God appoints." John loved his wife very much, but he was sometimes half vexed because she was never sad like he was. He would tell her that it was a very good thing to be cheerful and happy when they could get a good living. She then used to say to him that there was no virtue in being content when all was going on well, and that the proper time to try to be cheerful was when things were going amiss. At last, better times came. John got into work on the estate of a rich man who lived near, and as he was a very honest man and knew his work, his master soon put him in a place of trust, raised his wages, and gave him a good house to live in. John had by this time got 5 children, and he could no longer deny that he had reason enough to be a happy man. You may see him and his wife and children in the picture, enjoying a fine summer's evening in front of their house. I knew John when I was young, and he was always ready to say how much was due to his good wife. He told me that he owed all his good fortune to her cheerful spirits and good advice to him, and added that now he was well off, he found the truth of what she had told him, that the proper time to try to be cheerful was when things were going amiss. I have never forgot that lesson, and I hope I never shall. And I beg my young friends to keep in mind that contentment is a constant feast. There is work enough in the world for everyone to do something. There is no proper place for idle people. This is what old Michael the basket maker used to say to his children, and as they grew up, they found reason enough to thank him for the lesson. Michael had been a sailor in his youth, but when he married, he settled in a country place and took up the trade of a basket maker. At first, he could hardly get money enough to buy rods, but by working very hard, he soon got money and credit too. No one in the village was now up before Michael, and most people went to bed before he left off work. Small as was the sum of money that he could earn in a week, he would always put by something, if it was but a penny. Every month he put these savings into the savings bank, and in the course of the first 6 years, he found he had got £25. By this time he had got 2 children, and the eldest was old enough to learn to read. She used to sit by him with her book as he worked, and he taught her when she wanted help. His wife was in the meantime doing something in the house, or working for some of the farmers who lived near. Michael now bought a cow and 2 pigs and made some profit by them. In 6 years more he bought the cottage he lived in, and 12 years after this, that is 24 years after he was married, he rented a little farm. By this time he had 7 children, and as he had made his cottage larger, they all lived at home and helped him. His eldest boys worked at the farm, and the girls milked the cows and made the butter under the care of their mother and kept the poultry. As for Michael himself, though he was well off, he kept on his old trade and went on in his old habits. The last time I saw him before I left the place in which he lived, he was teaching his youngest child to read while he was at work, just as he had taught his eldest. I have often thought of Michael's words, "There is no place in the world for idle people." An accomplished wizard once lived on the top floor of a tenement house and passed his time in thoughtful study and studious thought. What he didn't know about wizardry was hardly worth knowing, for he possessed all the books and recipes of all the wizards who had lived before him, and moreover, he had invented several wizardments himself. This admirable person would have been completely happy, but for the numerous interruptions to his studies caused by folk who came to consult him about their troubles, in which he was not interested, and by the loud knocks of the iceman, the milkman, the baker's boy, the laundryman, and the peanut woman. He never dealt with any of these people, but they rapped at his door every day to see him about this or that, or to try to sell him their wares. Just when he was most deeply interested in his books or engaged in watching the bubbling of a cauldron, there would come a knock at his door. And after sending the intruder away, he always found he had lost his train of thought or ruined his compound. At length these interruptions aroused his anger, and he decided he must have a dog to keep people away from his door. He didn't know where to find a dog, but in the next room lived a poor glass blower with whom he had a slight acquaintance. So he went into the man's apartment and asked, "Where can I find a dog?" "What sort of a dog?" inquired the glass blower. "A good dog, one that will bark at people and drive them away, one that will be no trouble to keep and won't expect to be fed, one that has no fleas and is neat in his habits, one that will obey me when I speak to him. In short, a good dog," said the wizard. "Such a dog is hard to find," returned the glass blower, who was busy making a blue glass flower pot with a pink glass rose bush in it, having green glass leaves and yellow glass roses. The wizard watched him thoughtfully. "Why cannot you blow me a dog out of glass?" he asked presently. "I can," declared the glass blower, "but it would not bark at people, you know." "Oh, I'll fix that easily enough," replied the other. "If I could not make a glass dog bark, I would be a mighty poor wizard." "Very well. If you can use a glass dog, I'll be pleased to blow one for you. Only you must pay for my work." "Certainly," agreed the wizard. "But I have none of that horrid stuff you call money. You must take some of my wares in exchange." The glass blower considered the matter for a moment. "Could you give me something to cure my rheumatism?" he asked. "Oh, yes, easily." "Then it's a bargain. I'll start the dog at once. What color of glass shall I use?" "Pink is a pretty color," said the wizard. "And it's unusual for a dog, isn't it?" "Very," answered the glass blower, "but it shall be pink." So the wizard went back to his studies, and the glass blower began to make the dog. Next morning he entered the wizard's room with the glass dog under his arm and set it carefully upon the table. It was a beautiful pink in color, with a fine coat of spun glass, and about its neck was twisted a blue glass ribbon. Its eyes were specks of black glass and sparkled intelligently, as do many of the glass eyes worn by men. The wizard expressed himself pleased with the glass blower's skill, and at once handed him a small vial. "This will cure your rheumatism," he said. "But the vial is empty," protested the glass blower. "Oh no, there is one drop of liquid in it," was the wizard's reply. "Will one drop cure my rheumatism?" inquired the glass blower in wonder. "Most certainly. That is a marvelous remedy. The one drop contained in the vial will cure instantly any kind of disease ever known to humanity. Therefore it is especially good for rheumatism. But guard it well, for it is the only drop of its kind in the world, and I've forgotten the recipe." "Thank you," said the glass blower, and went back to his room. Then the wizard cast a wizzy spell and mumbled several very learned words in the wizardese language over the glass dog, whereupon the little animal first wagged its tail from side to side, then winked his left eye knowingly, and at last began barking in a most frightful manner. That is, when you stop to consider the noise came from a pink glass dog. There is something almost astonishing in the magic arts of wizards, unless, of course, you know how to do the things yourself, when you are not expected to be surprised at them. The wizard was as delighted as a school teacher at the success of his spell, although he was not astonished. Immediately he placed the dog outside his door, where it would bark at anyone who dared knock and so disturb the studies of its master. The glass blower, on returning to his room, decided not to use the one drop of wizard cure-all just then. "My rheumatism is better today," he reflected, "and I will be wise to save the medicine for a time when I am very ill, when it will be of more service to me." So he placed the vial in his cupboard and went to work blowing more roses out of glass. Presently he happened to think the medicine might not keep, so he started to ask the wizard about it. But when he reached the door, the glass dog barked so fiercely that he dared not knock, and returned in great haste to his own room. Indeed, the poor man was quite upset at so unfriendly a reception from the dog he had himself so carefully and skillfully made. The next morning, as he read his newspaper, he noticed an article stating that the beautiful Miss Midas, the richest young lady in town, was very ill, and the doctors had given up hope of her recovery. The glass blower, although miserably poor, hard-working, and homely of feature, was a man of ideas. He suddenly recollected his precious medicine, and determined to use it to better advantage than relieving his own ills. He dressed himself in his best clothes, brushed his hair and combed his whiskers, washed his hands and tied his necktie, blackened his shoes and sponged his vest, and then put the vial of magic cure-all in his pocket. Next he locked his door, went downstairs and walked through the streets to the grand mansion where the wealthy Miss Midas resided. The butler opened the door and said, "No soap, no chromos, no vegetables, no hair oil, no books, no baking powder. My young lady is dying, and we're well supplied for the funeral." The glass blower was grieved at being taken for a peddler. "My friend," he began proudly, but the butler interrupted him, saying, "No tombstones either. There's a family graveyard and the monument's built." "The graveyard won't be needed if you will permit me to speak," said the glass blower. "No doctors, sir. They've given up my young lady, and she's given up the doctors," continued the butler calmly. "I'm no doctor," returned the glass blower, "nor are the others. But what is your errand?" "I called to cure your young lady by means of a magical compound." "Step in, please, and take a seat in the hall. I'll speak to the housekeeper," said the butler more politely. So he spoke to the housekeeper, and the housekeeper mentioned the matter to the steward, and the steward consulted the chef, and the chef kissed the lady's maid and sent her to see the stranger. Thus are the very wealthy hedged around with ceremony, even when dying. When the lady's maid heard from the glass blower that he had a medicine which would cure her mistress, she said, "I'm glad you came. But said he. "If I restore your mistress to health, she must marry me." "I'll make inquiries and see if she's willing," answered the maid, and went at once to consult Miss Midas. The young lady did not hesitate an instant. "I'd marry any old thing rather than die," she cried. "Bring him here at once." So the glass blower came, poured the magic drop into a little water, gave it to the patient, and the next minute Miss Midas was as well as she had ever been in her life. "Dear me," she exclaimed, "I've an engagement at the Fritters' reception tonight. Bring my pearl-colored silk, Marie, and I will begin my toilet at once. And don't forget to cancel the order for the funeral flowers and your mourning gown." "But Miss Midas," remonstrated the glass blower who stood by, "you promised to marry me if I cured you." "I know," said the young lady, "but we must have time to make proper announcement in the society papers and have the wedding cards engraved. Call tomorrow and we'll talk it over." The glass blower had not impressed her favorably as a husband, and she was glad to find an excuse for getting rid of him for a time, and she did not want to miss the Fritters' reception. Yet the man went home filled with joy, for he thought his stratagem had succeeded, and he was about to marry a rich wife who would keep him in luxury forever afterward. The first thing he did on reaching his room was to smash his glass-blowing tools and throw them out of the window. He then sat down to figure out ways of spending his wife's money. The following day he called upon Miss Midas, who was reading a novel and eating chocolate creams as happily as if she had never been ill in her life. "Where did you get the magic compound that cured me?" she asked. "From a learned wizard," said he. And then, thinking it would interest her, he told how he had made the glass dog for the wizard, and how it barked and kept everybody from bothering him. "How delightful," she said. "I've always wanted a glass dog that could bark." "But there is only one in the world," he answered, "and it belongs to the wizard." "You must buy it for me," said the lady. "The wizard cares nothing for money," replied the glass blower. "Then you must steal it for me," she retorted. "I can never live happily another day unless I have a glass dog that can bark." The glass blower was much distressed at this, but said he would see what he could do. For a man should always try to please his wife, and Miss Midas has promised to marry him within a week. On his way home he purchased a heavy sack, and when he passed the wizard's door and the pink glass dog ran out to bark at him, he threw the sack over the dog, tied the opening with a piece of twine, and carried him away to his own room. The next day he sent the sack by a messenger boy to Miss Midas with his compliments, and later in the afternoon he called upon her in person, feeling quite sure he would be received with gratitude for stealing the dog she so greatly desired. But when he came to the door and the butler opened it, what was his amazement to see the glass dog rush out and begin barking at him furiously. "Call off your dog!" he shouted in terror. "I can't, sir," answered the butler. "My young lady has ordered the glass dog to bark whenever you call here." "You'd better look out, sir," he added, "for if it bites you, you may have glassophobia." This so frightened the poor glass-blower that he went away hurriedly. But he stopped at a drugstore and put his last dime in the telephone box so he could talk to Miss Midas without being bitten by the dog. "Give me Pelf 6742, he called. "Hello? What is it?" said a voice. "I want to speak with Miss Midas," said the glass-blower. Presently a sweet voice said, "This is Miss Midas. What is it?" "Why have you treated me so cruelly and set the glass dog on me?" asked the poor fellow. "Well, to tell the truth," said the lady, "I don't like your looks. Your cheeks are pale and baggy, your hair is coarse and long, your eyes are small and red, your hands are big and rough, and you are bow-legged." "But I can't help my looks," pleaded the glass-blower, "and you really promised to marry me." "If you were better looking, I'd keep my promise," she returned. "But under the circumstances, you are no fit mate for me, and unless you keep away from my mansion, I shall set my glass dog on you." Then she dropped the phone and would have nothing more to say. The miserable glass-blower went home with a heart bursting with disappointment, and began tying a rope to the bedpost by which to hang himself. Someone knocked at the door, and upon opening it, he saw the wizard. "I've lost my dog," he announced. "Have you indeed?" replied the glass-blower, tying a knot in the rope. "Yes, someone has stolen him." "That's too bad," declared the glass-blower indifferently. "You must make me another," said the wizard. "But I cannot. I've thrown away my tools." "Then what shall I do?" asked the wizard. "I do not know, unless you offer a reward for the dog." "But I have no money," said the wizard. "Offer some of your compounds, then," suggested the glass-blower, who was making a noose in the rope for his head to go through. "The only thing I can spare," replied the wizard thoughtfully, "is a beauty powder." "What?" cried the glass-blower, throwing down the rope. "Have you really such a thing?" "Yes, indeed. Whoever takes the powder will become the most beautiful person in the world." "If you will offer that as a reward," said the glass-blower eagerly, "I'll try to find the dog for you, for above everything else I long to be beautiful. But I warn you the beauty will only be skin deep," said the wizard. "That's all right," replied the happy glass-blower. "When I lose my skin, I shan't care to remain beautiful." "Then tell me where to find my dog, and you shall have the powder," promised the wizard. So the glass-blower went out and pretended to search, and by he returned and said, "I've discovered the dog. You will find him in the mansion of Miss Midas." The wizard went at once to see if this were true, and, sure enough, the glass dog ran out and began barking at him. Then the wizard spread out his hands and chanted a magic spell which sent the dog fast asleep, when he picked him up and carried him to his own room on the top floor of the tenement house. Afterward he carried the beauty powder to the glass-blower as a reward, and the fellow immediately swallowed it and became the most beautiful man in the world. The next time he called upon Miss Midas, there was no dog to bark at him, and when the young lady saw him, she fell in love with his beauty at once. "If only you were a count or a prince," she sighed, "I'd willingly marry you." "But I am a prince," he answered, "the prince of dog blowers." "Ah," said she, "then if you are willing to accept an allowance of $4 a week, I'll order the wedding cards engraved." The man hesitated, but when he thought of the rope hanging from his bedpost, he consented to the terms. So they were married, and the bride was very jealous of her husband's beauty and led him a dog's life. So he managed to get into debt and made her miserable in turn. As for the glass dog, the wizard set him barking again by means of his wizardness and put him outside his door. I suppose he is there yet, and am rather sorry, for I should like to consult the wizard about the moral to this story. Mamma had gone downtown to shop. She had asked Nora to look after Jane Gladys, and Nora promised she would. But it was her afternoon for polishing the silver, so she stayed in the pantry and left Jane Gladys to amuse herself alone in the big sitting room upstairs. The little girl did not mind being alone, for she was working on her first piece of embroidery, a sofa pillow for Papa's birthday present. So she crept into the big bay window and curled herself up on the broad sill while she bent her brown head over her work. Soon the door opened and closed again, quietly. Jane Gladys thought it was Nora, so she didn't look up until she had taken a couple more stitches on a forget-me-not. Then she raised her eyes and was astonished to find a strange man in the middle of the room who regarded her earnestly. He was short and fat and seemed to be breathing heavily from his climb up the stairs. He held a work silk hat in one hand, and underneath his other elbow was tucked a good-sized book. He was dressed in a black suit that looked old and rather shabby, and his head was bald upon the top. "Excuse me," he said, while the child gazed at him in solemn surprise. "Are you Jane Gladys Brown?" "Yes, sir," she answered. Very good indeed," he remarked with a queer sort of smile. "I've had quite a hunt to find you, but I've succeeded at last." "How did you get in?" inquired Jane Gladys with a growing distrust of her visitor. "That is a secret," he said mysteriously. This was enough to put the girl on her guard. She looked at the man, and the man looked at her, and both looks were grave and somewhat anxious. "What do you want?" she asked, straightening herself up with a dignified air. "Ah, now we are coming to business," said the man briskly. "I'm going to be quite frank with you. To begin with, your father has abused me in a most ungentlemanly manner." Jane Gladys got off the window-sill and pointed her small finger at the door. "Leave this room immediately," she cried, her voice trembling with indignation. "My papa is the best man in the world. He never bust anybody." "Allow me to explain, please," said the visitor, without paying any attention to her request to go away. "Your father may be very kind to you, for you are his little girl, you know. But when he's downtown in his office, he's inclined to be rather severe, especially on book agents. Now I called on him the other day and asked him to buy the complete works of Peter Smith. And what do you suppose he did?" She said nothing. "Why?" continued the man with growing excitement. "He ordered me from his office and had me put out of the building by the janitor. What do you think of such treatment as that from the best papa in the world, eh?" "I think he was quite right," said Jane Gladys. "Oh, you do? Well," said the man, "I resolved to be revenged for the insult. So, as your father is big and strong and a dangerous man, I have decided to be revenged upon his little girl." Jane Gladys shivered. "What are you going to do?" she asked. "I'm going to present you with this book," he answered, taking it from under his arm. Then he sat down on the edge of a chair, placed his hat on the rug, and drew a fountain pen from his vest pocket. "I'll write your name in it," said he. "How do you spell Gladys?" "Gladys," she replied. "Thank you. Now this," he continued, rising and handing her the book with a bow, "is my revenge for your father's treatment of me. Perhaps he'll be sorry he didn't buy the complete works of Peter Smith. Goodbye, my dear." He walked to the door, gave her another bow, and left the room, and Jane Gladys could see that he was laughing to himself as if very much amused. When the door had closed behind the queer little man, the child sat down in the window again and glanced at the book. It had a red and yellow cover, and the word "Thingamajigs" was across the front in big letters. Then she opened it, curiously, and saw her name written in black letters upon the first white leaf. He was a funny little man, she said to herself thoughtfully. She turned the next leaf and saw a big picture of a clown, dressed in green and red and yellow, and having a very white face with 3-cornered spots of red on each cheek and over the eyes. While she looked at this, the book trembled in her hands. The leaf crackled and creaked, and suddenly the clown jumped out of it and stood upon the floor beside her, becoming instantly as big as any ordinary clown. After stretching his arms and legs and yawning in a rather impolite manner, he gave a silly chuckle and said, "This is better. You don't know how cramped one gets standing so long upon a page of flat paper." Perhaps you can imagine how startled Jane Gladys was, and how she stared at the clown who had just leaped out of the book. "You didn't expect anything of this sort, did you?" he asked, leering at her in clown fashion. Then he turned around to take a look at the room, and Jane Gladys laughed in spite of her astonishment. "What amuses you?" demanded the clown. "Why, the back of you is all white," cried the girl. "You're only a clown in front of you." "Quite likely," he returned in an annoyed tone. "The artist made a front view of me. He wasn't expected to make the back of me, for that was against the page of the book. "But it makes you look so funny," said Jane Gladys, laughing until her eyes were moist with tears. The clown looked sulky and sat down upon a chair so she couldn't see his back. "I'm not the only thing in the book," he remarked crossly. This reminded her to turn another page, and she had scarcely noted that it contained the picture of a monkey when the animal sprang from the book with a great crumpling of paper and landed upon the window seat beside her. "Hee hee 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 hee," chattered the creature, springing to the girl's shoulder and then to the center table. "This is great fun. Now I can be a real monkey instead of a picture of one." "Real monkeys can't talk," said Jane Gladys reprovingly. "How do you know? Have you ever been one yourself?" inquired the animal. And then he laughed loudly, and the clown laughed too, as if he enjoyed the remark. The girl was quite bewildered by this time. She thoughtlessly turned another leaf, and before she had time to look twice, a gray donkey leaped from the book and stumbled from the window seat to the floor with a great clatter. "You're clumsy enough, I'm sure," said the child indignantly, for the beast had nearly upset her. "Clumsy? And why not?" demanded the donkey with angry voice. "If the fool artist had drawn you out of perspective as he did me, I guess you'd be clumsy yourself." "What's wrong with you?" asked Jane Gladys. "My front and rear legs on the left side are nearly 6 inches too short. That's what's the matter. If that artist didn't know how to draw properly, why did he try to make a donkey at all?" "I don't know," replied the child, seeing an answer was expected. "I can hardly stand up," grumbled the donkey, "and the least little thing will topple me over." "Don't mind that," said the monkey, making a spring at the chandelier and swinging from it by his tail until Jane Gladys feared he would knock all the globes off. "The same artist has made my ears as big as that clown's, and everyone knows a monkey hasn't any ears to speak of, much less to draw." "He should be prosecuted," remarked the clown gloomily. "I haven't any back." Jane Gladys looked from one to the other with a puzzled expression upon her sweet face, and turned another page of the book. Swift as a flash there sprang over her shoulder a tawny, spotted leopard, which landed upon the back of a big leather armchair and turned upon the others with a fierce movement. The monkey climbed to the top of the chandelier and chattered with fright. The donkey tried to run and straightway tipped over on his left side. The clown grew paler than ever, but he sat still in his chair and gave a low whistle of surprise. The leopard crouched upon the back of the chair, lashed his tail from side to side, and glared at all of them by turns, including Jane Gladys. "Which of us are you going to attack first?" asked the donkey, trying hard to get upon his feet again. "I can't attack any of you," snarled the leopard. "The artist made my mouth shut so I haven't any teeth, and he forgot to make my claws. But I'm a frightful-looking creature nevertheless, am I not?" "Oh, yes," said the clown indifferently. "I suppose you're frightful-looking enough. But if you have no teeth nor claws, we don't mind your looks at all." This so annoyed the leopard that he growled horribly, and the monkey laughed at him. Just then the book slipped from the girl's lap, and as she made a movement to catch it, one of the pages near the back opened wide. She caught a glimpse of a fierce grizzly bear looking at her from the page, and quickly threw the book from her. It fell with a crash in the middle of the room, but beside it stood the great grizzly, who had wrenched himself from the page before the book closed. "Now," cried the leopard from his perch, "you'd better look out for yourselves. You can't laugh at him as you did at me. The bear has both claws and teeth." "Indeed I have," said the bear in a low, deep, growling voice, "and I know how to use them too. If you read in that book, you'll find I'm described as a horrible, cruel, and remorseless grizzly, whose only business in life is to eat up little girls, shoes, dresses, ribbons, and all." And then the author says, "I smack my lips and glory in my wickedness." "That's awful," said the donkey, sitting upon his haunches and shaking his head sadly. "What do you suppose possessed the author to make you so hungry for girls? Do you eat animals also?" "The author does not mention my eating anything but little girls," replied the bear. "Very good," remarked the clown, drawing a long breath of relief. "You may begin eating Jane Gladys as soon as you wish. She laughed because I had no back, and she laughed because my legs are out of perspective," brayed the donkey. "But you also deserve to be eaten," screamed the leopard from the back of the leather chair, "for you laughed and poked fun at me because I had no claws nor teeth. Don't you suppose, Mr. Grizzly, you could manage to eat a clown, a donkey, and a monkey after you finish the girl?" "Perhaps so, and a leopard into the bargain," growled the bear. "It will depend on how hungry I am, but I must begin on the little girl first because the author says I prefer girls to anything." Jane Gladys was much frightened on hearing this conversation, and she began to realize what the man meant when he said he gave her the book to be revenged. Surely Papa would be sorry he hadn't bought the complete works of Peter Smith when he came home and found his little girl eaten up by a grizzly bear, shoes, dress, ribbons, and all. The bear stood up and balanced himself on his rear legs. "This is the way I look in the book," he said. "Now watch me eat the little girl." He advanced slowly toward Jane Gladys, and the monkey, the leopard, the donkey, and the clown all stood around in a circle and watched the bear with much interest. But before the grizzly reached her, the child had a sudden thought and cried out, "Stop! You mustn't eat me. It would be wrong." "Why?" asked the bear in surprise. "Because I own you. You're my private property," she answered. "I don't see how you make that out," said the bear in a disappointed tone. "Why, the book was given to me. My name's on the front leaf, and you belong by rights in the book, so you mustn't dare to eat your owner." The grizzly hesitated. "Can any of you read?" he asked. "I can," said the clown. "Then see if she speaks the truth. Is her name really in the book?" The clown picked it up and looked at the name. "It is," said he. "Jane Gladys Brown," and written quite plainly in big letters. The bear sighed. "Then of course I can't eat her," he decided. "That author is as disappointing as most authors are." "But he's not as bad as the artist," exclaimed the donkey, who was still trying to stand up straight. "The fault lies with yourselves," said Jane Gladys severely. "Why didn't you stay in the book where you were put?" The animals looked at each other in a foolish way, and the clown blushed under his white paint. "Really," began the bear, and then he stopped short. The doorbell rang loudly. "It's Mama!" cried Jane Gladys, springing to her feet. "She's come home at last. Now, you stupid creatures." But she was interrupted by them all making a rush for the book. There was a swish and a whir and a rustling of leaves, and an instant later the book lay upon the floor, looking just like any other book, while Jane Gladys's strange companions had all disappeared. This story should teach us to think quickly and clearly upon all occasions. For had Jane Gladys not remembered that she owned the bear, he probably would have eaten her before the bell rang. There lived in Boston a wise and ancient chemist by the name of Dr. Dawes, who dabbled somewhat in magic. There also lived in Boston a young lady by the name of Claribel Sudds, who was possessed of much money, little wit, and an intense desire to go upon the stage. So Claribel went to Dr. Dawes and said, "I can neither sing nor dance. I cannot recite verse nor play upon the piano. I am no acrobat, nor leper, nor high kicker. Yet I wish to go upon the stage. What shall I do?" "Are you willing to pay for such accomplishments?" asked the wise chemist. "Certainly," answered Claribel, jingling her purse. "Then come to me tomorrow at 2 o'clock," said he. All that night he practiced what is known as chemical sorcery, so that when Claribel Sudds came next day at 2 o'clock, he showed her a small box filled with compounds that closely resembled French bonbons. "This is a progressive age," said the old man, "and I flatter myself your Uncle Dawes keeps right along with the procession. Now, one of your old-fashioned sorcerers would have made you some nasty, bitter pills to swallow, but I have consulted your taste and convenience. Here are some magic bonbons. If you eat this one with the lavender color, you can dance thereafter as lightly and gracefully as if you had been trained a lifetime. After you consume the pink confection, you will sing like a nightingale. Eating the white one will enable you to become the finest elocutionist in the land. The chocolate piece will charm you into playing the piano better than Rubinstein, while after eating the lemon-yellow bonbon you can easily kick 6 feet above your head." "How delightful!" exclaimed Claribel, who was truly enraptured. "You are certainly a most clever sorcerer as well as a considerate compounder." And she held out her hand for the box. "Ahem," said the wise one. "A check, please." "Oh yes, to be sure. How stupid of me to forget it." she returned. He considerately retained the box in his own hand while she signed a check for a large amount of money, after which he allowed her to hold the box herself. "Are you sure you have made them strong enough?" she inquired anxiously. "It usually takes a great deal to affect me." "My only fear," replied Dr. Dawes, "is that I have made them too strong, for this is the first time I have ever been called upon to prepare these wonderful confections." "Don't worry," said Clarabelle. "The stronger they act, the better I shall act myself." She went away after saying this, but stopping in at a dry goods store to shop, she forgot the precious box in her new interest and left it lying on the ribbon counter. Then little Bessie Bostwick came to the counter to buy a hair ribbon and laid her parcels beside the box. When she went away, she gathered up the box with her other bundles and trotted off home with it. Bessie never knew, until after she had hung her coat in the hall closet and counted up her parcels, that she had one too many. Then she opened it and exclaimed, "Why, it's a box of candy. Someone must have mislaid it. But it is too small a matter to worry about. There are only a few pieces." So she dumped the contents of the box into a bonbon dish that stood upon the hall table, and picking out the chocolate piece, she was fond of chocolates, ate it daintily while she examined her purchases. These were not many, for Bessie was only 12 years old and was not yet trusted by her parents to expend much money at the stores. But while she tried on the hair ribbon, she suddenly felt a great desire to play upon the piano, and the desire at last became so overpowering that she went into the parlor and opened the instrument. The little girl had, with infinite pains, contrived to learn 2 pieces, which she usually executed with a jerky movement of her right hand, and a left hand that forgot to keep up, and so made dreadful discords. But under the influence of the chocolate bonbon, she sat down and ran her fingers lightly over the keys, producing such exquisite harmony that she was filled with amazement at her own performance. That was the prelude, however. The next moment she dashed into Beethoven's 7th Sonata and played it magnificently. Her mother, hearing the unusual burst of melody, came downstairs to see what musical guest had arrived. But when she discovered it was her own little daughter who was playing so divinely, she had an attack of palpitation of the heart, to which she was subject, and sat down upon a sofa until it should pass away. Meanwhile, Bessie played one piece after another with untiring energy. She loved music, and now found that all she need do was to sit at the piano and listen and watch her hands twinkle over the keyboard. Twilight deepened in the room, and Bessie's father came home and hung up his hat and overcoat and placed his umbrella in the rack. Then he peeped into the parlor to see who was playing. "Great Caesar!" he exclaimed. But the mother came to him softly with her finger on her lips and whispered, "Don't interrupt her, John. Our child seems to be in a trance. Did you ever hear such superb music?" "Why, she's an infant prodigy," gasped the astounded father. Beats Blind Tom all hollow. It's wonderful." As they stood listening, the senator arrived, having been invited to dine with them that evening, and before he had taken off his coat, the Yale professor, a man of deep learning and scholarly attainments, joined the party. Bessie played on, and the four elders stood in a huddled but silent and amazed group, listening to the music and waiting for the sound of the dinner gong. Mr. Bostwick, who was hungry, picked up the bonbon dish that lay on the table beside him and ate the pink confection. The professor was watching him, so Mr. Bostwick courteously held the dish toward him. The professor ate the lemon-yellow piece, and the senator reached out his hand and took the lavender piece. He did not eat it, however, for, chancing to remember that it might spoil his dinner, he put it in his vest pocket. Mrs. Bostwick, still intently listening to her precocious daughter without thinking what she did, took the remaining piece, which was the white one, and slowly devoured it. The dish was now empty, and Claribel Sudd's precious bonbons had passed from her possession forever. Suddenly Mr. Bostwick, who was a big man, began to sing in a shrill tremolo soprano voice. It was not the same song Bessie was playing, and the discord was shocking that the professor smiled. The senator put his hands to his ears, and Mrs. Bostwick cried in a horrified voice, "William!" Her husband continued to sing, as if endeavoring to emulate the famous Christine Nilsson, and paid no attention whatever to his wife or his guests. Fortunately, the dinner gong now sounded, and Mrs. Bostwick dragged Bessie from the piano and ushered her guests into the dining room. Mr. Bostwick followed, singing "The Last Rose of Summer," as if it had been an encore demanded by 1,000 delighted hearers. The poor woman was in despair at witnessing her husband's undignified actions and wondered what she might do to control him. The professor seemed more grave than usual. The senator's face wore an offended expression, and Bessie kept moving her fingers as if she still wanted to play the piano. Mrs. Bostwick managed to get them all seated, although her husband had broken into another area. And then the maid brought in the soup. When she carried a plate to the professor, he cried in an excited voice, "Hold it higher! Higher! I say!" And springing up, he gave it a sudden kick that sent it nearly to the ceiling, from whence the dish descended to scatter soup over Bessie and the maid, and to smash in pieces upon the crown of the professor's bald head. At this atrocious act the senator rose from his seat with an exclamation of horror and glanced at his hostess. For some time Mrs. Bostwick had been staring straight ahead with a dazed expression, but now, catching the senator's eye, she bowed gracefully and began reciting "The Charge of the Light Brigade" in forceful tones. The senator shuddered. Such disgraceful rioting he had never seen nor heard before in a decent private family. He felt that his reputation was at stake, and, being the only sane person apparently in the room, There was no one to whom he might appeal. The maid had run away to cry hysterically in the kitchen. Mr. Bostwick was singing "Oh, Promise Me." The professor was trying to kick the globes off the chandelier. Mrs. Bostwick had switched her recitation to "The Boy Stood on the Burning Deck," and Bessie had stolen into the parlor and was pounding out the overture from the "Flying Dutchman." The senator was not at all sure he would not go crazy himself presently. So he slipped away from the turmoil and, catching up his hat and coat in the hall, hurried from the house. That night he sat up late writing a political speech he was to deliver the next afternoon at Faneuil Hall. But his experiences at the Bostwicks had so unnerved him that he could scarcely collect his thoughts. And often he would pause and shake his head pityingly as he remembered the strange things he had seen in that usually respectable home. The next day he met Mr. Bostwick in the street, but passed him by with a stony glare of oblivion. He felt he really could not afford to know this gentleman in the future. Mr. Bostwick was naturally indignant at the direct snub, yet in his mind lingered a faint memory of some quite unusual occurrences at his dinner party the evening before, and he hardly knew whether he dared resent the senator's treatment or not. The political meeting was the feature of the day, for the senator's eloquence was well known in Boston. So the big hall was crowded with people, and in one of the front rows sat the Bostwick family, with the learned Yale professor beside them. They all looked tired and pale, as if they had passed a rather dissipated evening, and the senator was rendered so nervous by seeing them that he refused to look in their direction a second time. While the mayor was introducing him, the great man sat fidgeting in his chair, and happening to put his thumb and finger into his vest pocket, he found the lavender-colored bonbon he had placed there the evening before. "This may clear my throat," thought the senator, and slipped the bonbon into his mouth. A few minutes afterwards he arose before the vast audience which greeted him with enthusiastic plaudits. "My friends," began the senator in a grave voice, "this is a most impressive and important occasion." Then he paused, balanced himself upon his left foot, and kicked his right leg into the air in the way favored by ballet dancers. There was a hum of amazement and horror from the spectators, but the senator appeared not to notice it. He whirled around upon the tips of his toes, kicked right and left in a graceful manner, and startled a bald-headed man in the front row by casting a languishing glance in his direction. Suddenly Claribel Sudds, who happened to be present, uttered a scream and sprang to her feet, pointing an accusing finger at the dancing senator. She cried in a loud voice, "That's the man who stole my bonbons! Seize him! Arrest him! Don't let him escape!" But the ushers rushed her out of the hall, thinking she had gone suddenly insane, and the senator's friends seized him firmly and carried him out the stage entrance to the street, where they put him into an open carriage and instructed the driver to take him home. The effect of the magic bonbon was still powerful enough to control the poor senator, who stood upon the rear seat of the carriage and danced energetically all the way home, to the delight of the crowd of small boys who followed the carriage and the grief of the sober-minded citizens who shook their heads sadly and whispered that another good man had gone wrong. It took the senator several months to recover from the shame and humiliation of this escapade, and curiously enough, he never had the slightest idea what had induced him to act in so extraordinary a manner. Perhaps it was fortunate the last bonbon had now been eaten, for they might easily have caused considerably more trouble than they did. Of course, Clarabelle went again to the wise chemist and signed a check for another box of magic bonbons, but she must have taken better care of these, for she is now a famous vaudeville actress. This story should teach us the folly of condemning others for actions that we do not understand, for we never know what may happen to ourselves. It may also serve as a hint to be careful about leaving parcels in public places, and incidentally to let other people's packages severely alone. The capture of Father Time. Jim was the son of a cowboy and lived on the broad plains of Arizona. His father had trained him to lasso a bronco or a young bull with perfect accuracy, and had Jim possessed the strength to back up his skill, he would have been as good a cowboy as any in all Arizona. When he was 12 years old, he made his first visit to the East, where Uncle Charles, his father's brother, lived. Of course, Jim took his lasso with him, for he was proud of his skill in casting it, and wanted to show his cousins what a cowboy could do. At first, the city boys and girls were much interested in watching Jim lasso posts and fence pickets, but they soon tired of it, and even Jim decided it was not the right sort of sport for cities. But one day the butcher asked Jim to ride one of his horses into the country, to a pasture that had been engaged, and Jim eagerly consented. He had been longing for a horseback ride, and to make it seem like old times he took his lasso with him. He rode through the streets demurely enough, but on reaching the open country roads, his spirits broke forth into wild jubilation, and urging the butcher's horse to full gallop, he dashed away in true cowboy fashion. Then he wanted still more liberty, and letting down the bars that led into a big field, he began riding over the meadow and throwing his lasso at imaginary cattle, while he yelled and whooped to his heart's content. Suddenly, on making a long cast with his lasso, the loop caught upon something and rested about 3 feet from the ground, while the rope drew taut and nearly pulled Jim from his horse. This was unexpected. More than that, it was wonderful, for the field seemed bare of even a stump. Jim's eyes grew big with amazement, but he knew he had caught something when a voice cried out, "Here, let go! Let go, I say! Can't you see what you've done?" No, Jim couldn't see, nor did he intend to let go until he found out what was holding the loop of the lasso. So he resorted to an old trick his father had taught him, and putting the butcher's horse to a run, began riding in a circle around the spot where his lasso had caught. As he thus drew nearer and nearer his quarry, he saw the rope coil up, yet it looked to be coiling over nothing but air. One end of the lasso was made fast to a ring in the saddle, and when the rope was almost wound up and the horse began to pull away and snort with fear, Jim dismounted. Holding the reins of the bridle in one hand, he followed the rope, and an instant later saw an old man caught fast in the coils of the lasso. His head was bald and uncovered, but long white whiskers grew down to his waist. About his body was thrown a loose robe of fine white linen. In one hand he bore a great scythe, and beneath the other arm he carried an hourglass. While Jim gazed wonderingly upon him, this venerable old man spoke in an angry voice. "Now then, get that rope off as fast as you can. You've brought everything on earth to a standstill by your foolishness. Well, what are you staring at? Don't you know who I am?" "No," said Jim stupidly. "Well, I'm Time, Father Time. Now make haste and set me free, if you want the world to run properly." "How did I happen to catch you?" asked Jim, without making a move to release his captive. "I don't know. I've never been caught before," growled Father Time. "But I suppose it was because you were foolishly throwing your lasso at nothing." "I didn't see you," said Jim. "Of course you didn't. I'm invisible to the eyes of human beings unless they get within 3 feet of me, and I take care to keep more than that distance away from them. That's why I was crossing this field, where I supposed no one would be, and I should have been perfectly safe had it not been for your beastly lasso. Now then," he added crossly, "are you going to get that rope off?" "Why should I?" asked Jim. "Because everything in the world stopped moving the moment you caught me. I don't suppose you want to make an end of all business and pleasure and war and love and misery and ambition and everything else, do you? Not a watch has ticked since you tied me up here like a mummy." Jim laughed. It really was funny to see the old man wound round and round with coils of rope from his knees up to his chin. "It'll do you good to rest," said the boy. "From all I've heard, you lead a rather busy life." "Indeed I do," replied Father Time with a sigh. "I'm due in Kamchatka this very minute, and to think one small boy is upsetting all my regular habits." "Too bad," said Jim with a grin. "But since the world has stopped anyhow, it won't matter if it takes a little longer recess. As soon as I let you go, time will fly again. Where are your wings?" "I haven't any," answered the old man. "That is a story cooked up by someone who never saw me. As a matter of fact, I move rather slowly." "I see you take your time," remarked the boy. "What do you use that scythe for?" "To mow down the people," said the ancient one. "Every time I swing my scythe, someone dies." "Then I ought to win a life-saving medal by keeping you tied up," said Jim. "Some folks will live this much longer." "But they won't know it," said Father Time with a sad smile. "So it will do them no good. You may as well untie me at once." "No," said Jim with a determined air. "I may never capture you again, so I'll hold you for a while and see how the world wags without you." Then he swung the old man, bound as he was, upon the back of the butcher's horse, and getting into the saddle himself, started back toward town, one hand holding his prisoner and the other guiding the reins. When he reached the road, his eye fell on a strange tableau. A horse and buggy stood in the middle of the road, the horse in the act of trotting, with his head held high and two legs in the air, but perfectly motionless. In the buggy a man and a woman were seated, but had they been turned into stone they could not have been more still and stiff. "There's no time for them," sighed the old man. "Won't you let me go now?" "Not yet," replied the boy. He rode on until he reached the city, where all the people stood in exactly the same positions they were in when Jim lassoed Father Time. Stopping in front of a big dry goods store, the boy hitched his horse and went in. The clerks were measuring out goods and showing patterns to the rows of customers in front of them, but everyone seemed suddenly to have become a statue. There was something very unpleasant in this scene, and a cold shiver began to run up and down Jim's back, so he hurried out again. On the edge of the sidewalk sat a poor, crippled beggar, holding out his hat, and beside him stood a prosperous-looking gentleman who was about to drop a penny into the beggar's hat. Jim knew this gentleman to be very rich, but rather stingy, so he ventured to run his hand into the man's pocket and take out his purse, in which was a $20 gold piece. This glittering coin he put in the gentleman's fingers instead of the penny, and then restored the purse to the rich man's pocket. "That donation will surprise him when he comes to life," thought the boy. He mounted the horse again and rode up the street. As he passed the shop of his friend, the butcher, he noticed several pieces of meat hanging outside. "I'm afraid that meat'll spoil," he remarked. "It takes time to spoil meat," answered the old man. This struck Jim as being queer, but true. "It seems time meddles with everything," said he. "Yes, you've made a prisoner of the most important personage in the world," groaned the old man, "and you haven't enough sense to let him go again." Jim did not reply, and soon they came to his uncle's house, where he again dismounted. The street was filled with teams and people, but all were motionless. His two little cousins were just coming out the gate on their way to school, with their books and slates underneath their arms. So Jim had to jump over the fence to avoid knocking them down. In the front room sat his aunt, reading her Bible. She was just turning a page when time stopped. In the dining room was his uncle, finishing his luncheon. His mouth was open and his fork poised just before it, while his eyes were fixed upon the newspaper folded beside him. Jim helped himself to his uncle's pie, and while he ate it, he walked out to his prisoner. "There's one thing I don't understand," said he. "What's that?" asked Father Time. "Why is it that I'm able to move around while everyone else is froze up?" "That is because I'm your prisoner," answered the other. "You can do anything you wish with time now. But unless you are careful, you'll do something you will be sorry for." Jim threw the crust of his pie at a bird that was suspended in the air, where it had been flying when time stopped. "Anyway," he laughed, "I'm living longer than anyone else. No one will ever be able to catch up with me again. Each life has its allotted span," said the old man. "When you have lived your proper time, my scythe will mow you down." "I forgot your scythe," said Jim thoughtfully. Then a spirit of mischief came into the boy's head, for he happened to think that the present opportunity to have fun would never occur again. He tied Father Time to his uncle's hitching post, that he might not escape, and then crossed the road to the corner grocery. The grocer had scolded Jim that very morning for stepping into a basket of turnips by accident. So the boy went to the back end of the grocery and turned on the faucet of the molasses barrel. "That'll make a nice mess when time starts the molasses running all over the floor," said Jim with a laugh. A little further down the street was a barber shop, and sitting in the barber's chair Jim saw the man that all the boys declared was the meanest man in town. He certainly did not like the boys, and the boys knew it. The barber was in the act of shampooing this person when time was captured. Jim ran to the drugstore, and getting a bottle of mucilage, he returned and poured it over the ruffled hair of the unpopular citizen. "That'll probably surprise him when he wakes up," thought Jim. Nearby was the schoolhouse. Jim entered it and found that only a few of the pupils were assembled, but the teacher sat at his desk, stern and frowning as usual. Taking a piece of chalk, Jim marked upon the blackboard in big letters the following words: "Every scholar is requested to yell the minute he enters the room. He will also please throw his books at the teacher's head. Signed, Prof. Sharp." "That ought to raise a nice rumpus," murmured the mischief-maker as he walked away. On the corner stood Policeman Mulligan, talking with old Miss Scrapple, the worst gossip in town, who always delighted in saying something disagreeable about her neighbors. Jim thought this opportunity was too good to lose. So he took off the policeman's cap and brass-buttoned coat and put them on Miss Scrapple, while the lady's feathered and ribboned hat he placed jauntily upon the policeman's head. The effect was so comical that the boy laughed aloud, and as a good many people were standing near the corner, Jim decided that Miss Scrapple and Officer Mulligan would create a sensation when time started upon his travels. Then the young cowboy remembered his prisoner, and, walking back to the hitching post, he came within 3 feet of it and saw Father Time still standing patiently within the toils of the lasso. He looked angry and annoyed, however, and growled out, "Well, when do you intend to release me?" "I've been thinking about that ugly scythe of yours," said Jim. "What about it?" asked Father Time. "Perhaps if I let you go you'll swing it at me the first thing to be revenged," replied the boy. Father Time gave him a severe look, but said, "I've known boys for thousands of years, and of course I know they're mischievous and reckless. But I like boys, because they grow up to be men and people my world. Now if a man had caught me by accident, as you did, I could have scared him into letting me go instantly. But boys are harder to scare. I don't know as I blame you. I was a boy myself, long ago when the world was new. But surely you've had enough fun with me by this time, and now I hope you'll show the respect that is due to old age. Let me go, and in return I will promise to forget all about my capture. The incident won't do much harm anyway, for no one will ever know that time has halted the last 3 hours or so." "All right," said Jim cheerfully. "Since you've promised not to mow me down, I'll let you go." But he had a notion some people in the town would suspect time had stopped when they returned to life. He carefully unwound the rope from the old man, who, when he was free, at once shouldered his scythe, rearranged his white robe, and nodded farewell. The next moment he had disappeared, and with a rustle and rumble and roar of activity the world came to life again, and jogged along as it always had before. Jim wound up his lasso, mounted the butcher's horse, and rode slowly down the street. Loud screams came from the corner, where a great crowd of people quickly assembled. From his seat on the horse, Jim saw Miss Scrapple, attired in the policeman's uniform, angrily shaking her fists in Mulligan's face, while the officer was furiously stamping upon the lady's hat, which he had torn from his own head amidst the jeers of the crowd. As he rode past the schoolhouse, he heard a tremendous chorus of yells, and knew Profernball Sharp was having a hard time to quell the riot caused by the sign on the blackboard. Through the window of the barber shop he saw the mean man frantically belaboring the barber with a hairbrush, while his hair stood up stiff as bayonets in all directions. And the grocer ran out of his door and yelled, "Fire!" while his shoes left a track of molasses wherever he stepped. Jim's heart was filled with joy. He was fairly reveling in the excitement he had caused when someone caught his leg and pulled him from the horse. "What are you doing here, you rascal?" cried the butcher angrily. "Didn't you promise to put that beast inter Plimpton's pasture? And now I find you ridin' the poor nag around like a gentleman o' leisure." "That's a fact," said Jim with surprise. "I clean forgot about the horse." This story should teach us the supreme importance of time and the folly of trying to stop it. For should you succeed as Jim did in bringing time to a standstill, the world would soon become a dreary place and life decidedly unpleasant. And now as we come to the end of this session, if you're still awake, I would like you to feel the calm you've created within yourself. You've given your mind and body such a beautiful gift, a moment to simply be. Let that sense of peace stay with you as you move through the rest of your night. If you'd like, you can stay here a little longer.